fighting you, Parker.
What are you doing to these people?
Don't you believe in adoption, Parker? After all, you're the mommy. Kids, come meet Parker. Show Parker how much we love him.
Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another very exciting Marvel Spider-Man 2 related video, once again having another laid-back discussion pertaining to a very intriguing topic for the game, and specifically one primary feature which I'm sure a lot of you, myself included, and my amazing guest today desperately want to see one way or another be featured within Marvel Spider-Man 2 itself, or potentially what Insomniac Games might have planned for the future of the Marvel's Spider-Man franchise. And today, I am joined by the one and only incredible Carlos Escobosa, who you may know as The Initiative, who does a plethora of amazing videos relating to everything that you can think of relating to Marvel Comics, games, movies, and so on. So definitely make sure to go and follow him on all of his awesome social channels to share the love and support him as much as you can. Carlos, how you doing today?
Hey Evan, I'm doing good. I miss talking to you about Spider-Man, so I'm really glad to be here talking about Spider-Man 2 and Venom and everything that goes with that.
As we all know and are currently expecting from this game and the wider universe Insomniac has been crafting, is that Venom is going to have a major presence within Marvel Spider-Man 2 as one of, if not the main, antagonists of the core story, as we obviously see at the very end of the teaser trailer, and has also been teased at the very end of both post-credit scenes for the first Marvel Spider-Man game and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, where we see our buddy Harry Osborn trapped in this tank surrounded by the symbiote, which is more than likely keeping him alive due to the disease that he has inhabited from his mom. But one element that we do not know of as of right now is whether or not Venom is going to be an officially playable character within Marvel Spider-Man 2. Because of just like how we have seen in the past with one of my favorite Spider-Man games with Ultimate Spider-Man having that same exact feature be one of the core gameplay elements that surrounded the game, and, more importantly, the story that it was telling. Between the relationship that was formed between Peter Parker and Eddie Brock within the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which was then even more elaborated upon within the story that was told in the Ultimate Spider-Man game. And just like what we have seen Insomniac do in Marvel's Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, is really fully develop the relationship that Peter and Harry Osborn have with one another as best friends. And if Insomniac decides to take the route of making Harry the main host of the Venom symbiote instead of Eddie Brock, there is going to be a lot more of a dynamic connection between Peter and Harry if they end up fighting each other as Spider-Man and Venom. But the question does remain whether or not Insomniac is going to take the extra step and make Venom playable either in the base Marvel Spider-Man 2 experience, or maybe save that for another type of standalone title down the line, just like what we saw with Miles Morales get his own spin-off game. So Carlos, what do you think about Venom's inclusion within Marvel Spider-Man 2, and how exactly do you believe Insomniac should go about it if they want to enhance Venom's inclusion in this universe even further?
Okay, so for me, I don't really believe in there being a should or shouldn't way of how to handle it. I trust Insomniac will do it however they want to do it, and I hope that I'll love it, right? Like you said, playing as Venom is not unprecedented. We've seen that in Ultimate Spider-Man. And so far, the Insomniac Spider-Man franchise has done a pretty good job of balancing playing as multiple characters, right? In the first game, we play as Miles, MJ, and Peter, and Spider-Man. And then, of course, in the Miles game, we get to play as Miles with, his own unique moveset thanks to his Venom Blast and everything. So I could totally see Insomniac going down this path and giving us a playable Venom. However, I do kind of, while I was listening to you talk, I started wondering, I feel like, is there maybe too much going on in the second game to include a playable Venom? Because, it sounds like we're going to have Peter, we're going to have Miles, we're going to have a symbiote version of Peter, perhaps. And now on top of that, we're going to play as Venom too. Is that too much, I wonder? That's something that started to creep in my head while listening to you talk just now. But what do you think about that?
I totally agree, because there is a lot of massive potential on the line here with this game in terms of player interaction with both Spider-Man. Because, as you should all know at this point, Marvel Spider-Man 2 is confirmed to be a PlayStation 5 exclusive, which is going to fully showcase exactly what a true next-gen superhero game can be and play like while running on that console. That, of course, relates to the fidelity of the graphics, the immersion of player interaction with the DualSense controller, faster loading times, 60 frames per second graphics mode, but mainly how much type of gameplay variety Insomniac can include with this game. We're definitely going to be web swinging around the city with an even more fluid and fast-paced web swinging system that is going to be incorporated for both, most likely, Peter and Miles to completely improve upon what we've already seen in both of their previous games. But yeah, like you said, is adding Venom maybe a bit too much to deal with right now based on everything else they're going to include with the game? And this is where I think what we were talking about before we started recording, Carlos, is kind of the Last of Us Part 2 element of things comes in, where if you guys have not played that game, especially since I know it is kind of a controversial title amongst the video game community, myself included, there is a sequence in the game, spoilers, where Joel, the main character of the first Last of Us game, dies by the hand of a character named Abby. And throughout the entirety of the game and during its early promotions, you, as the player, thought that your main goal is to try and hunt Abby down as Ellie to get revenge for Joel, obviously, because that makes the most sense. However, what ended up actually happening is you play as Abby herself throughout half of the entirety of The Last of Us Part 2, which really did not jazz well with a lot of players, but on the flip side, it introduces something that is kind of unique in the sense that you're getting a direct perspective of the antagonist's point of view throughout the campaign. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because you were able to fully sympathize with both Ellie and Abby if the story did connect with you in that good of a way, to even grasp a further sense of connectivity between what each individual character was experiencing at those points in time during the story itself. You saw what Ellie was experiencing firsthand, and you saw what Abby was experiencing with firsthand. So, in Marvel Spider-Man 2, what I'm personally hoping for is if Insomniac can do that exact same type of dual interactivity by playing as Peter and Miles as the heroes of the campaign with Spider-Man, of course, but maybe take things a step further by having Venom be playable as a villain would be incredible, like Ultimate Spider-Man, but also maybe have sequences of the game where you're simply playing as Harry Osborn outside of the Venom symbiote and see how exactly he is handling things after coming out of that incubative state that we see him at both the ending of the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games. But seeing how Harry might build up to that point and become Venom by playing as him outside of the Venom symbiote would add even more narrative depth and immersion to the story that Insomniac could be telling.
Yeah, so like you said, I think, on my side of things, I actually really loved how The Last of Us 2 handled the Abby stuff, because it did put me in the perspective of the antagonist, and it did make me actually care about Abby a lot. And I think if Insomniac can pull that off with Harry, I would love to see that, I don't think, me personally, I don't think I'd need to play as Venom if we're already gonna have the symbiote available as a gameplay mechanic with Peter, because at that point it's just can they really flush out Venom that much more? Even, is it really necessary? Whereas, I think playing as Harry outside of the symbiote, maybe leading up to him fully becoming Venom, if they can have us play as Harry in that way and make us care about Harry the same way they made us care about Doc Ock in the first game, now that I think would be something truly special, especially if we're bouncing back and forth between Peter and Miles. I think Harry could provide that human element, being able to play as him, because you and I were talking prior to recording and we were saying stuff like, how the Mary Jane missions, they were not everyone's favorite, but they did kind of help break up the pacing. well, I think the Harry stuff could maybe help the pacing as well if we are able to bounce back from, doing a mission as symbiote Peter and then going to play as Miles and action, and then emotional Harry stuff that helps you connect with him and worry about him and be sad about him turning into Venom or something. I think that would be really, really cool. But when it comes to playing as Venom, I don't know. And not that I'm not excited, but what I'm more excited about is the emotional connection that we could form with Harry and Venom. And, possibly in the future, as long as we're talking about playing as villains and seeing things from the villain's point of view, I don't think there's a more famous Spider-Man story about that than Superior Spider-Man, which, some would argue that there's been some groundwork laid for that in the first Insomniac Spider-Man game as well. I can't off the top of my head name a Spider-Man game where we get to play as Doc Ock, so that would actually be something that I think would be more unprecedented and more of a surprise and kind of alluring in that sense. Yeah, I would love to see things from Harry's point of view and attach myself to him before, hitting him with a Venom blast as Miles Morales or, webbing him up at the end of the game as Peter or something, yeah.
And this is where the really interesting final factor of this discussion comes in, with the possibility of having Venom not only be a major presence of Marvel Spider-Man 2, like what we're all currently expecting him to be, as well as Kraven the Hunter, which is going to be an incredible villain or maybe anti-hero, depending on how Insomniac goes about it, to experience in the narrative that Insomniac will tell in the game. But again, looking to the future of what this all means. Back in 2018, after Marvel Spider-Man 1 released, we all thought that the next step of this journey would be, of course, here, now with Marvel Spider-Man 2. And then, inevitably, Marvel Spider-Man 3. But what ended up happening is that Miles actually got his own standalone spin-off game, completely dedicating the entirety of the narrative around Miles and playing as him as a fully fleshed-out Spider-Man. And even though it was shorter and smaller in scope and scale in comparison to the first game, it was still a fully fledged developed game for Miles top to bottom. So, if Insomniac wants to take that again a step further but for Venom, who's to stop them from making their own standalone spin-off Venom game? We're already getting Marvel Spider-Man 2, we're clearly going to get a fully fledged Wolverine game from Insomniac down the line as well, but knowing how popular Venom is, there is going to be a lot of hype for Venom as a character overall in the next few years, especially by the time Venom ends up being as a core threat to deal with in Marvel Spider-Man 2 next year in 2023. And if Insomniac were to essentially, like what you were saying before we start recording, Carlos, if they were to make their own prototype game, pretty much, it would be a dream come true for a lot of hardcore Venom fans like myself. So how do you think that Insomniac could potentially handle a fully fledged solo Venom game in comparison to a character like Spider-Man, Miles, or Wolverine?
Yeah, so I would love to see Insomniac tackle more of the Spider-Man supporting cast in spin-off games, similar to how they did Miles. But actually, I was going to bring up Prototype as something that leads me to believe they won't do it, because I feel like what would set them apart, right? And I think there is a lot of stuff that would, don't get me wrong, but I wonder if there's a sense of been there, done that, or if there's, an excitement to been there, let's go back. And I mean, Insomniac has had great success with kind of revitalizing things that have been done before. I mean, we've had plenty of Spider-Man games before Insomniac tackled Spider-Man, and they took it and they did something incredible with it that has been critically acclaimed by, critics and fans alike. So, and now they're going to do Wolverine, who has also had a history not only in movies but in games as well. And I fully believe that they'll knock it out of the park. So while a part of me does feel like, well, we've played as Venom before, well, there's been the prototype games, another part of me is like, well, you know what? I mean, if there's anyone I trust with this, it's Insomniac. And Venom has so much lore in the comics to bounce off of, especially after the Donny Cates run, which finished about like a year ago or so. I don't remember anymore. Time is all a blur now thanks to COVID. But Donny Cates' run was revolutionary in helping Venom kind of stand on his own as a hero. And I heard you use the word anti-hero just now. And I think you were applying it to Kraven, but I mean, if you want to talk about anti-heroes, I think, seeing the success of Sony's Venom movies, looking at the success of the Donny Cates Venom run, I think making a anti-hero game with Venom by Insomniac would be pretty badass. The question then becomes, though, who would Venom be in this game? Would it be Harry, or would we transition onto Eddie Brock somehow? And would we stay in New York, or would we go to San Francisco, or would we, keep it grounded, or would we introduce like the god of the symbiotes and Null, So there's definitely a lot that you could play with, but who knows? I mean, maybe the next spin-off will just be a sequel to the Miles Morales game, and it'll be another Miles game, or maybe the next spin-off will be even more out of the box and it'll be a Spider-Girl game. I feel like there's plenty of things Insomniac could do with their Spider-Man franchise. Personally, me, if I had to pick between Spider-Girl or Venom, I'd be conflicted. I guess we'll have to see we'll have to wait and see how Venom is portrayed in Spider-Man 2. How do you feel? I mean, there's so many possibilities, right?
Totally agree, because it's insane how much unique opportunities Insomniac have already taken, with liberties of killing Aunt May in the first game, Doc Ock pretty much being a potato now, and hinting, like you said, to the Superior Spider-Man story arc, where his mind still continues to go on, but his body continues to degrade and, wither away. And if that potentially sets up a Superior Spider-Man storyline for the third game, who knows? There's so much opportunity to take here that the universe can be expanded and twisted in so many interesting ways that will always offer for more intriguing stories, but also for more awesome and playable and enjoyable games to develop stories around for these characters. The reason why Miles got his own game was because he is a really well-rounded, fully fleshed out, developed character that you can also expand as his journey continues with him becoming his own Spider-Man. And the same thing could happen here with Venom, again, depending on how Insomniac decides to approach it, making him an anti-hero, like you said, or a full-on villain, Web of Shadows style, or what have you. There's all these routes that they can take, and obviously, of course, money talks, so Sony, considering that they now own them as a first-party developer, would have the final say in this. But if Marvel's Spider-Man, considering how well the first game sold, being the highest-selling superhero game of all time, Miles recently crossing the top 3 chart of one of the most highly successful financially published games coming from Sony Interactive Entertainment, and clearly how hyped we all are for Marvel Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine, if they have a kind of interim in between those two, then yeah, go for it with Venom and make him his own character to fully embrace yourself in, if you're not going to make him playable already in Marvel Spider-Man 2. And with all that said, true believers, that is the video that Carlos and I both have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to both of our channels if you did enjoy. Let us know all your thoughts. Do you want to see Venom be a playable character in Marvel Spider-Man 2? Or maybe hold off until he gets his own standalone spin-off game somewhere down the line? It'd be very cool to see whether Insomniac decides to go that route or not, but regardless, we are definitely extremely excited to see exactly what they do with Venom by the time Marvel Spider-Man 2 releases in 2023. Thank you so much for joining me on this video, Carlos. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you for having me, Evan. I love talking Spider-Man with you.
And with all that said, true believers, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans, and until next time, peace out.